Alright, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I'm going to do something a little different. Usually I do mostly openings on this channel, but today we're going to do a little bit of a deck tech here for this new commander that came out of Zendikar Rising recently, Omnath, Locus of Creation. And this has been a pretty popular card since it came out. A lot of people building around this. Obviously, a lot of landfall decks, which is what this one is going to be as well. It's a red, green, white, blue commander, legendary creature, elemental, and it says when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, which is great. And it has landfall, and of course, most of the cards in here are going to go work pretty well with a lot of lands entering the battlefield. And it says whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, you gain 4 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. If it's the second time, add red, green, white, blue. If it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. Alright, so it's a really good landfall deck. It's 4 colors, so we can add in a lot of cool stuff in here. Let's take a look at it first. We'll look at our creatures. So we'll set this off to the side. I think I'm running around 31 creatures in this deck, if I remember correctly, if I remember when I counted it. So first of all, of course, we have not the original Omnath, but the second Omnath, the Omnath Locus of Rage. This is going to be a bit of a token deck, or at least that's the goal of it, to create lots of tokens to swing out at our opponent. So first one with this Omnath Locus of Rage, it says landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token. Whenever Omnath Locus of Rage or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to any target. So we got a lot of value in this card. We create a lot of 5/5s, and we're hoping to do this in several ways, and we'll get to that in a few minutes here. But we should be able to create lots of 5/5s by playing a lot of lands, a lot of fetches, pulling stuff out of our graveyard, lands out of our graveyard, so we can get more and more of these tokens. And that's sort of the theme with all of this this whole deck. All right, so that's the first one. Next, of course, we have Avenger of Zendikar. When it enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land you control. And hopefully, you know, by the time we get to late game and we can play this card, we could have anywhere from like 10, 15 lands, maybe possibly even up to 20 if we're lucky, if it gets to that point really late in the game. And its landfall ability is whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, you may put a 1/1 counter on each plant you control. Now, this is like a card that everybody knows about, and it's really great. We're going to try and be putting a lot of +1/+1 counters on here. And we have an enchantment in here that's going to help with that even more, putting +1/+1 counters on each creature we control, which we'll get to in a few minutes. After that, we have sort of like baby Avenger of Zendikar, I guess we like to call it, because it's not quite as good, but it does make those plant tokens for us, which goes really well with Avenger of Zendikar, because we're going to get more plant tokens than just from that. So it says when Philath, World Sculptor, enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each basic land you control. So it's only basic lands, it's not all of your lands, which is not quite as good as Avenger of Zendikar, but we're going to have a decent amount of basic lands in here, and we do get some more of those 0/1 plant tokens that we're going to be able to put +1/+1 counters on. And this says, for landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put 4 +1/+1 counters on a target plant you control. So we're going to have at least one of our plants getting those extra counters each time that we play a land. All right. Next thing, a new card from Zendikar Rising also is Scute Swarm, which is pretty awesome in Standard. I mean, it gets removed pretty easily because it's only a 1/1, but if you can keep it on the battlefield for at least a couple of turns and you have 6 lands out there, you're going to start making a lot of tokens. So this says landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token, and if you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scute Swarm instead. So it gets to the point where you're just making like tens up to maybe even hundreds of tokens if you can keep this thing on the battlefield and keep creating tokens that are copies of this. And this will go really well too, and we'll try and like get those creatures buffed out a little bit as well. All right. Next, classic landfall card, been around for a long time. The Rampaging Ballast has trampled 6/6, and whenever a land enters the battle under your control, create a 4/4 green beast token. So again, another token card in here. Pretty standard stuff. So those are our token generators that we're going to have in this. So we have 5 different token generators that we are going to try to use to really swarm and take our opponents out with a large number of creatures at a time. All right. Next, in a landfall deck, probably every landfall deck is going to have Lotus Cobra in there. So whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, add 1 mana of any color. Does some good mana fixing if you can get this out early. Next, we have Ameria Shepherd. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, you may return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, which is great, so we can get some stuff back into our hand that may have died earlier in the game, because it's 7 mana, 5 and 2 white, so it's probably more of a late game kind of card, but that's kind of nice because you can start playing lands and then getting cards back into your hand. But if it's a plains card, you can return that card to the battlefield, and it says a non-land permanent, so it could be anything. It could be enchantments, artifacts, anything that we may have lost over the course of the game. Next, not the greatest of card, but it's fun to just put this in here because this thing can get pretty big pretty quick. If damage will be dealt to, Undergrowth Champion, 1 and 2 green, it's an elemental. If damage will be dealt to Undergrowth Champion, while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, prevent that damage, remove a +1/+1 counter from Undergrowth Champion, and it has its Landfall ability, which is whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Undergrowth Champion. So this thing can get pretty big pretty fast if we can keep it on the battlefield. Next, we have Morag, Fury of Akum. It is 4 and 2 red, legendary creature, Minotaur Warrior. Now, this is a great landfall card because it's going to give us extra combat steps. And when we're making all of these tokens, having those extra combat steps and then buffing them up a little bit is really going to help us out to attack out and take out our opponents. So it says each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it has attacked this turn. So when you have your second attack, you're going to put a +1/+0 on it, or not a counter, but you're going to add, you're going to buff it up a little bit. So it says landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this one. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So it's really nice to get those extra combat phases when we're making a lot of tokens. Next thing, it's one of the more dirty cards. A lot of people don't like getting their things stolen in Magic, but hey, that's just the nature of the game, and it's a great win con. Royal Elemental. It has flying. It's a 3/2. It's a 3 and 3 blue. It says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain control of target creature for as long as you control Royal Elemental. So we got to keep this thing on the battlefield, but it is kind of nice because we can start stealing stuff, and if somebody doesn't have enough removal out there, we're going to keep a lot of their cards, all right? And just taking other people's stuff, you know, like I said, it's kind of dirty, but, you know, that's just part of the game. That's part of Magic, is taking other people's stuff sometimes. All right, next thing, we got some cards that are going to let us play additional lands in each turn. This is really important because we do have some graveyard strategies. We're going to be playing lands from our graveyard. So we're going to have Azusa Lost Beseeker in here, a very important one. You may play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. And this is just huge because what this is going to do is let us play several fetch lands out of our graveyard if we can get those pieces in there and get that together to get a lot of those landfall triggers for not only our token generators but also for Omnath, our commander. So we have Azusa, same thing, Oracle of Moldiah, 3 and a green. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. You play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play lands from the top of your library. So not only do we get to play an additional land on each of our turns, we also get to look at the top card of our library. I mean, everybody gets to see it, but if it's a land, you can put it right there and onto the battlefield from your deck, which is a really powerful, ability that it has. Next, we have Mina and Den, Wildborn, 2 and with a red and a green. And it says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. So again, more cards that lets us play additional lands on our turns, which is really important. And you can play a red and a green, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Target creature gains trample until end of turn. So if we're putting a lot of +1/+1 counters on some of our plants creatures, and we have like a really big buffed out plant, we can give it trample and do some pretty good damage to it. Even if we get like some of our like Omnaths that are in here, we get them buffed up from other +1/+1 counters and giving them trample. We can do commander damage with our commander, the Locus of Creation. But this is a really important one. Return a land you control to its owner's hand. This is going to come in handy later on if we can get some of the other pieces out for this card, and getting lands back into our hand and playing them again, which is going to trigger those landfall abilities. And another one, Wayward Swordtooth. Again, you may play an additional land each of your turn, and it has Ascend, so you can get the City's Blessing. If you have the City's Blessing, it can attack or block. You can't do that until you have 10 permanents, but you do get the City's Blessings for the entire game, even if you have less than 10 permanents after that. So another important card lets you play an additional land on each of your turns. Another card that lets us play lands off the top of our library, the Courser of Krufix. It's 1/2 green, enchantment creature. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library if it's a land card. When a land enters the battlefield under control, you gain 1 life. So again, more top deck manipulation there that we can use. Alright, so now another new card from Zendikar Rising. We got Ancient Greed Warden. It's a 5/7 with reach. It's a 4 and 2 green. It says you may play lands from your graveyard. And again, this is going to be one of our big strategies, is being able, we're going to have a lot of recursion in this deck, a lot of ways to get lands out of our graveyard. So you can play lands from your graveyard, and if a land enters the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. This is huge. It's going to create double the amount of tokens that you would normally make from our token creators. It's going to put more +1/+1 counters on there when lands enter the battlefield. It's going to help us to draw more cards from other cards that we may have. So this is an auto-include in any sort of landfall deck. Next, we have Tatiova, Benthic Druid. Of course, this is going to be in any landfall deck because whenever a land enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. Card draw is one of the most important things in Commander. This one is going to do some work for us. Next, we have Tireless Tracker. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, you investigate. So you put a colorless clue artifact token on the battlefield, and it has pay 2, sacrifice this, draw a card. So this is just some more card draw for us. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this. So it can get pretty big. Next, we have Multani, Yavamaya's Avatar, 4 and 2 green. It has reach and trample. It gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land card in your graveyard. So that's important. We're going to have a lot of lands in our graveyard, some of our fetches. So this thing's going to get buffed up pretty big. And it's got trample, which is great. You can pay 2, return 2 lands you control to their owner's hand. So this gets lands back into our hands so that we can get some more of those landfall triggers. And then we have the old Hoof Behemoth. So this guy, again, with the token deck, this is going to be a necessary card in this. It's pretty much just a game ender. You have a lot of tokens on the battlefield, and you drop this down, you're going to win the game. It's pretty much a game ender. Next, we have Rada, Heart of Keld. This is another card that it's going to help us get to play lands off the top of our deck, which is important. Always being able to, it's almost like extra card draw when you're able to play lands off the top of your deck. It's really good like that. Next one, another new card, Shaya, Soul of the Wild, 3 and 2 green. And this card is going to be really great in this deck because it says non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. So every time we play a creature that aren't tokens, we get landfall triggers because they will enter as forests, and that will trigger our landfall abilities. So this is a great card in here. Next, we have another Omnath, the Locus of the Royal. This is some more card draw for us. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to any target equal number of elementals you control. With some of our token generators and some of our other elementals in this deck, we can do some good damage to other creatures. It's like some good spot removal. It says whenever land enters the battlefield under control, put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental you control, and if you control 8 or more lands, draw a card. So again, I get some more card draw in here. We get to buff up some of our creatures. I can buff up Omnath so we can get in for some commander damage, giving it trample with some other cards. Really going to help us out. This is a card that I haven't really seen in too many Omnath builds, but I think it's great because it has basically a landfall trigger, all right? Or it's going to help us with our landfall triggers. It says whenever you cast a creature spell, it's Karametra, God of the Harvest, 3, a green and a white. It's indestructible because it's a god. As long as your devotion to green and white is less than 7, it isn't a creature, but whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or plains, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So this is going to really help us out with our landfall triggers, getting those lands out of our decks and onto the battlefield. I think this is going to be a pretty good card in here. Next, we have Living Twister. Discard a land. It's 2 red and a green. And it says, pay 1 and a red, discard a land card. Living Twister deals 2 damage to any target. We don't really care about that too much. What we really are focused on is this, pay 1 green, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Again, we're going to want to be able to return lands to our hand so that we can play them again for those landfall triggers. Another great card for this deck. Beast Whisperer goes in just about any green deck. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Not much more to say about that. Here we go. It's just a cantrip. We got a couple of those cantrips coming up here. We got Euro, Titans of Nature's Wrath. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice unless it escaped. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life, draw a card, and you put a land card from your hand on the battlefield. So again, this is going to help us with some some of our landfall triggers. Next, we got Eternal Witness, another green staple, returning stuff from our battlefield to our hands. Coiling Oracle, another sort of cantrip. When it enters the battlefield, reload top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. So that helps us out a little bit. Spring Bloom Druid. When this enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land. If you do, search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, tap, and shuffle your library. So this is some more ramp for us if we need it, and also with those landfall triggers later in the game. And same thing with Sakura Tribe Elder, helping us to ramp up, get to the colors that we need. It says you can you can sacrifice it right away. You don't have to tap it, so that's nice. You can do it right away. Search your library for basic land card, put that battlefield onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. All right, so those are all of our creature cards. So I think it's 31 total. So as you can see, a pretty heavy landfall theme here. Next, we have our artifacts, and we'll take a look at those. Some more card draw. There's a lot of card draw in this deck, which is really important because we want to dig and get to the things that we want. First of all, we have Seer Sundial for 4, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. Pretty straightforward. We have Lightning Greaves, another commander staple. Should go in just about any deck so we can protect our commander, keep it on the battlefield. So we have that. Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Crucible of Worlds. And this is the first piece well, I guess we already showed one, but this is another piece in our graveyard strategy where you may play lands cards from your graveyard. And it's going to be very important getting all those fetches back out of our graveyard and playing them again so we can keep getting those landfall triggers. All right, so we don't really have much like ramp as far as artifacts go. I mean, we have Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, but that's pretty much all we need because we will be getting a lot of lands onto the battlefield with the cards that we have. All right. Next, we have our instants, and let's see here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 instants, so not a whole lot. We actually have more sorceries in here than instants, which I normally don't like to do, but we'll talk about those here in a second to see why that's important. First, we have Roiling Regrowth. Sacrifice the land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, tap, and shuffle your library. So again, getting that ramp in there. This is an instant, which is nice. You can play this at the end of your opponent's turn. Sack a land, search your library, get 2 cards out, and then whatever land you sacked, you should be able to play it again with things like Crucible of the Worlds and some other cards that we have. Next, we have Worldly Tutor, so just to help us search out for any of those creatures that we may need. Just depends on where you're at in the game and what you need to get. So search your library for creature card, reveal it to all players, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. And great, it's another great instant card to help us get to where we need to be and get the creatures that we want. Next, this one's a little more expensive, but it's kind of nice. So search your library. It's shared summons, 3 and 2 green. Search your library for up to 2 creature cards with different names. Reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. So we're going to tutor up 2 creature cards with this, which is going to help us out quite a bit. Next, we just have a couple removal spells. We have Path to Exile, which is, sort of a staple in white, getting rid of some creatures that we need to get rid of. Beast Within, another great card for green. It says destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. So this says destroy target permanent, which is really important, not just a creature, any permanent on the battlefield. And again, another green staple goes in just about any deck. We do run a copy of Heroic Intervention because we will want to make sure that we can protect all those tokens from board wipes. Something to keep in your hand for quite a while when you need it. Just have 1 counterspell on here, and it's counterspell. Got to have 1 in a blue deck. And finally, in any deck with blue in it, you got to be running Cyclonic Rift. It's just a dirty card, and people just hate when this gets played against them. But if you're running blue, you should probably be running Cyclonic Rift. Just an important card. All right, next we have our sorceries, and we do have quite a few of these. But you'll see why some of the extra sorceries in here are pretty important. But first we have Nature's Lore. You can search your library for force card, put it into play, shuffle your library. Don't have to put it into play tapped. You can search for one of our triomes with that, some of our shock lands, and some of our basic lands. So it's a great card because it says search for a forest. Next, we have Farseek, and again, ramping and also getting landfall triggers if it's later in the game. Search your library for plains, island, swamp, or mountain. Put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. It does come in tapped, but it does give us that ability to find a plains, an island, a swamp, or a mountain. It gives us some good leeway there. Help us get some of those triomes, too. Next, we have Cultivate. Cultivate, 2 and a green, search your library for 2 basic lands, put 1 on the battlefield tapped and 1 into your hand. And when we can play extra lands, we're probably going to get both those cards onto the battlefield right away as well. Next, we have Migration Path. Search your library for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. The reason why this is in here is because it does have cycling too, so it does give us some card draw if we're going to need that earlier in the game to get the things we need into our hand. More searching our library for lands. Skyshroud Claim, 3 and a green. Search your library for 2 forest cards, put them into play, then shuffle your library. Again, having that forest ability on there is pretty important because that's going to help us get a shock land. It's going to help us get one of our triomes. Playing cards like this is really important because it's not just basic lands you get. You can get some non-basic lands out of there too. Next sorcery we have is Scape Shift. Sacrifice any number of lands, search your library for up to that many land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. So this is going to be a great landfall trigger here because we're going to sacrifice a bunch of lands and go and just replace them right away and get all those landfall triggers and then be able to play the cards that we sacrifice out of our graveyard. So Scape Shift is going to be a great card in this deck. Next we have Genesis Ultimatum. 2 green, 3 blue, and 2 red. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest into your hand. Exile Genesis Ultimatum. So this is going to be great to get some permanents out there. It's going to get some lands onto the battlefield, get some of those landfall triggers. This is going to be a pretty good card in here, especially late game. We're going to like that one a lot. Genesis Wave does the same thing. We pay X and 3 green. You reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of permanent cards with converted mana cost extra or less from among them onto the battlefield, then put all cards revealed that way that weren't put into the battlefield into your graveyard. So this is going to be a great card, and we're going to get a lot of landfall triggers off of this as well. And then we also have a good game finisher here with Finale of Devastation. If we have a bunch of tokens on the field and we can play this for X for 10, we're probably going to win the game as well, and we're probably going to search for Crater Hoof Behemoth if we don't already have it out. And that's just going to end the game right there. So you're going to search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost extra or less, put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. If X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X, and gain haste until end of turn. Fantastic card. Game ender. One of the best cards in green that should be played in just about any green commander deck running creatures. Alright. Next thing we have our 4 flip lands from Zendikar Rising. And these are going to be really important because a lot of times we're going to be playing these as lands in the early game. If we look at the backside here of Seagate Restoration, for example, we have a land on the backside and it says, at Seagate, Reborn enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, enters the battlefield tapped. So these are probably ones that we're going to use like for the land portion early in the game if we draw them early. And we're going to pay 3 life, so they come in untapped most of the time. If it's like first turn, second turn, probably not going to pay that 3 life. But the great thing about this is we have cards that are going to be able to return lands to our hand. So if we have the land part of this out on the battlefield, and then we're going to need this later in the game, we can return this to our hand and then play the sorcery side where we draw cards equal to the number of the cards in your hand +1, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So great card draw spell here. It is a land, so we can get that landfall trigger, and we can return this land to our hand and then play the sorcery side. Same thing with Ameria's Call. It's going to give us some tokens. We're going to create 2 4/4 White Angel Warrior creature tokens with flying. Non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn. So that's going to be great for swinging out at our opponents and giving them indestructible. And again, there's a land on the backside, so you can tap for white. Shatter Skull Smashing. Again, another land on the backside. It deals X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. If X is 6 or more, Shatter Skull Smashing deals twice X damage divided as you choose among them instead. So this is a nice, great removal card later in the game. And again, if we play it for a land earlier on, we can return it to our hand. And then we do have one board wipe in here. It is Onto Inversion, and it says destroy all non-land permanents. So, and I believe this one just comes in tapped. You don't have the choice of paying 3 life on this one, I don't think. Yeah, so this one, it just comes in tapped if you play it as its land. But we do have one board wipe in there in case things don't go our way and we got to get rid of some bunch of creatures that are going to kill us pretty soon. So I'll have that in there. So we don't run, you know, a full 40 lands like a lot of these cards do. That's because we do have these 4 extra cards in here that can be played as lands. Next we have our enchantments. And these are going to do some of the same things that we've done with some of our other cards. Rites of Flourishing, 2 and a green. beginning of each player's draw step, that player's draw an additional card. It does help our opponents out a little bit, but it helps us too. And each player may play an additional land each of their turn. So again, it helps us out. We want to be able to play extra lands. Not everyone we're playing against is going to have landfall, so it's going to help us out more than it's going to help out our opponents in most cases. All right. Next thing, again, you may play an additional land on each of your turns for exploration. Beautiful card here, by the way. I just love the artwork on this. Just, again, some more stuff that gives us an ability to play extra lands on each of your turns. Colony Heart Expedition has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under control, you may put a quest counter on Colony Heart Expedition. Remove 3 of those counters, sacrifice it, search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. So, helps us out, again, with those landfall triggers. Alright. Next thing, another token generator. We have Felidar Retreat. And this says, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. You can create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token. Or you can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So the great thing about this too is that you can create, if you can get 2 lands out at one time, you can create the 2/2 creature and put +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, and you can stack those in your favor so that the creature comes out first, and then put a +1/+1 counter on it after that. Next we have Zendikar's Royal, another token generator. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, create a 2/2 green elemental creature token. Fantastic. And then we have Velikut Exploration, another new card, and this says landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. So again, this is just some extra like sort of card draw for us. It gets cards into exile and being able to play them right away. If we don't have anything that we can draw cards with right away, this will help out to get some of those cards that give us the ability to play them. And that's it for our main deck, and now we just have our lands, and we'll go through these kind of quick. We do have all the fetches in here for our colors. So we have Misty Rainforest. For some reason this camera is just not focusing very well. So we have Misty Rainforest, and it is the good old Seth MacKinnon art version from, what do you call it, the Secret Lair series. So we got Misty Rainforest, we got Windswept Heath, Flooded Strand, Arid Mesa, Wooded Foothills, and Scalding Tarn. Alright, so we have all of our fetch lands here. Another pretty much, it's considered a fetch land. And we got the original artwork on our playmat here for this. The Prismatic Vista. Pay 1 life, search your library for a basic land card. So not quite as good as our fetches, but still helps out. Fabled Passage, another fetch basically. Blighted Woodland, and Myriad Landscape. So those are going to be like all the cards that we use to go and get other lands out of our library and put them onto the battlefield. And these are the cards that we are going to be wanting to play from our graveyard, so we can just keep getting those landfall triggers over and over and over again. All right. Next we have our shocks. We have Hollowed Fountain, Sacred Foundry, Temple Garden, Breeding Pool, Stomping Ground, and Steam Vents. Alright. Then we have a couple of our lands that just help us fix our mana a little bit. Exotic Orchard goes great in any deck. Field of the Dead, another token generator. We're going to have a lot of lands on the battlefield that are different, so this is really going to eventually help us out. We're going to start making 2/2 zombies. Again, it's almost like landfall triggers as well, where we're going to get like several different cards or lands coming out at a time and making more and more 2/2 zombie tokens. Great card. We do have a couple triomes in here so that we can search for those, because it does say Island, Mountain, Plains on here, so we have a card that says to search for one of those types of lands, which we do. We'll be able to pull this out. Same thing as the Ketria triome. This one we can get a Forest, Island, or Mountain. Command Tower, as always. And then our basic lands. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 forests in here. And we have 4 islands, 3 mountains, and 2 plains. And that is our mana base for this deck. So I think it is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. 36 lands. But we do also have those 4 cards, the 4 sorceries from Zendikar Rising, that give us a land on their flip side. So really we have 40 total lands in here if you want to think of it that way. So that is the deck for Omnath, Locus. I hope to go to my shop tomorrow and give this thing a try. Check it out. Hopefully it does well. If you have any suggestions or comments to make about this deck and what I could add to it, what I could take out, what I could do differently, let me know. Leave those down in the comments. It'd be great to hear from you. Thanks for watching the video. Should be doing a couple more deck tech videos here pretty soon. But if you have any comments, leave them down there. Let me know.